Thank you all so much for coming out this evening. This is our fourth round of public involvement meetings since 2009 for the Broad Street Bus Rapid Transit study. And we're very pleased to be here this evening because we've come a long way since 2009 when we first started this study. And we're finally at a point we're wanting to bring a recommendation out and to advance it into the next phases of project development. So your being here this evening is very meaningful, and your input is greatly appreciated. So we really, we do mean that. I'm Amy Inman. I'm with the Department of Rail and Public Transportation. Our department, in collaboration with GRTC, have been advancing the Broad Street study, and we've been working collaboratively with the City of Richmond, Henrico County, who are our planning partners, as well as the Federal Transit Administration, and of course VDOT, so who is also our close planning partner, as well as the Metropolitan Planning Organization, the MPO. So we've had really, I think, outstanding collaboration, as well as very healthy public involvement. And again, that's why we're here, is to serve the public and to provide better transportation, accessibility, and options that will hopefully lead to mobility freedom for everybody, and we all want that. So before I go any further, I would like to just acknowledge a few folks. We do have Senator Harry Marsh, who is here with us this evening. Thank you very much for coming. We also have, thank you Mr. Marsh. We also have Mark Ollinger from the City of Richmond. Thank you, Mark, for coming. We have Ben Campbell. Yep. We have Ben Campbell with RVA Rapid Transit, and Danny Fogger with the Virginians for High Speed Rail. Thank you, Danny. We appreciate all of your help. We also have Virginia Cowles from the League of Women Voters, and thank you, Virginia. Thank you for coming. Virginia comes to our meetings, and we're very thankful for that. With our project team, we have David Green, who's the CEO of GRTC. Stephen McNally, who is our project manager for the BRT at GRTC. We also have Garland Williams, who's with GRTC. And I know Laura Toothman, who's also with GRTC. And with our project team, we have Lorna Parkins. She has been our project manager on this since the beginning, and Lorna has done an outstanding job. So we're very grateful for Lorna. We also have Scudder Wag, and Scudder has really been there to help everyone through this process, as well as Chris Chop, who's with Baker. So have I missed anyone? I hope not. If I have, then you can see me later. No. A couple of housekeeping items. We do have the comment form that hopefully everyone received. We do want to have some dialogue and some discussion, so if anyone has any questions, we'll have the Q&A piece of this evening after the presentation. But if you don't feel like coming up and speaking, this is the good way to communicate your thoughts with us. We will be accepting public comments through June 6th, so please feel free. We have a website. There's also a mailing address on here that you can also send it to us that way if you don't feel like filling it out this evening. So just before we get too much further, we get to hear the train. Now, this is a really great thing because we're in a building that is so historic, and we've put a lot of money, and it's a beautiful, beautiful investment for this region. But hearing those trains come through is always something that's very special, and it's nice to hear. So I would like to send it over to David Green, who will give. I'd like for him to just say a few words before we get going into the presentation.
Thanks, Amy. Good evening, everyone. David Green, I'm Chief Executive Officer for GRTC, and I would like to welcome you all to our public meeting on Broad Street Rapid Transit. I think it's been about 9 months since our last public meeting, and we're really excited to be at a point where we can meet with you all again and update everybody on exactly where we are and where we're going. This is a project that has been evolving for more than 5 years. There have been a significant number of people from a number of different agencies involved with the project. Folks who have volunteered countless hours devoted to an idea, not necessarily because of any obligation, but because they understand the benefits that this will extend to the community and the impact that it could have to the overall region as a whole. It has truly been a collaborative effort, and I know some of the folks who were involved throughout the process are with us tonight, so I'd like to take a moment to thank them for their support, for their time, and for their input along the way. So thank you very much. I'd also like to thank you all for joining us tonight and for your interest in the project. We do have a lot of information available for you tonight, so I do encourage you to ask questions. If not during the Q&A following the presentation, then feel free to get with any of the team members located throughout the room with name tags back at the information boards. And as Amy indicated, we do also have comment cards which are available to the back of the room to my left. I also encourage you to please feel free to take one throughout the night and fill it out, provide whatever input or comments that you are willing to offer. So thanks again, appreciate you all being here, and I'm going to turn it back over to Lorna for the presentation. Thanks again.
Thank you. So I'm Lorna Parkins. As Amy mentioned, I'm the project manager for this study. And I'm going to take a few minutes to just walk you through some of the basic information about the project, beginning with a review of the process that we've been through up until now, and then really focusing on what is our recommended alternative, what are its impacts and benefits. We're going to talk a little bit about costs and where the money will come from to fund the project, not only to build it, but also to operate it. And then we're going to talk about where we go from here after tonight. So in terms of the process that we've had so far, as David was just mentioning, this project has been a long time in coming. It's been addressed in a number of studies over the years, regional studies of transit needs, as well as GRTC's own studies of operational improvements that are needed and where there's a market for transit services in the region. So we've been going through a process of kind of two concurrent sets of activities. One is looking at what all the alternatives might be for rapid transit, and then also looking at what the environmental impacts would be, not only in terms of things like wetlands and endangered species, but also communities along the corridor. So we've been proceeding through both sort of prongs of the study since 2009, and now we are at a point where we have a recommended alternative and we're ready to move forward. So that's very exciting. So let's start with a little bit of background on the recommended alternative itself. The recommended alternative is a bus rapid transit service running along Broad Street from Willow Lawn to downtown, then following 14th Street to Main Street, right out here, and then following Main Street all the way out to Rockets Landing in the East End. The BRT service will use dedicated lanes in various portions of the corridor, and so I'll walk you through that in just a moment. But first, let's talk a little bit about what we mean by bus rapid transit. Bus rapid transit is a unique type of transit service, and it's really a very appropriate type of transit technology for a city the size of Richmond. It provides high quality, high capacity, and rapid transit, but it creates those improvements through investments in vehicles, in buses that are relatively affordable, station improvements, traffic signal operations, and some improvements to the roadway itself where the bus is running. So it's unlike some of the rail types of transit. It's not sort of a one-size-fits-all uniform system. It is really customized to the corridor in which it's located. Some of the examples of BRT improvements include low floor buses. So you would have what we call level boarding, just like a light rail car would have, where you step straight from the station into the bus. We'd have sidewalk and crosswalk improvements to improve safety in accessing the buses. The buses would have signal priority to help them have a streamlined trip through the corridor. We'd have off-board fare collection, again, similar to rail, but much more affordable in total with bus rapid transit. But some of those amenities like off-board fare collection really help save time and give you that sense of urban transit. And of course, the dedicated lanes are a very important part of the BRT approach. So the way that we've developed our recommended alternative is really kind of looking at the corridor in 4 parts. We have distinctly different sort of traffic characteristics and land use in these 4 different parts of the corridor. And so, again, because bus rapid transit is a flexible approach to rapid transit, we have customized our recommended alternative in each section of the corridor. So, so I'll walk you through that. But throughout the corridor, what you would have is in the peak period, so that's the morning and evening rush hours, you'd have a bus every 10 minutes. And then between the peak periods, you'd have a bus every 15 minutes. You'd have new BRT vehicles. They'd all use compressed natural gas, CNG. And then we've got 14 stations and a park and ride lot throughout the corridor. So let's start in the West End. In this part of the corridor, you don't have a lot of traffic congestion, and you've got 3 lanes in each direction on Broad Street. So the way that we create bus rapid transit, the way that we improve the travel time for these buses is by having just a fewer set of stops. So instead of stopping at every corner, you've got a Willow Lawn stop, you've got a stop at Staples Mill, and then again at Hamilton. And so that way the buses have a more streamlined trip through that part of the corridor. They'd just be riding with traffic, but there could be some signal improvements in this section. The next section goes all the way from Hamilton to Thompson. So this section goes through the Museum District and the VCU area. And here, traffic levels are a little bit higher, but there's still not a whole lot of congestion. In fact, if you drive through this part of the corridor, you probably notice that people avoid the left lane so they don't get stuck behind somebody turning left. Well, we would take that lane, and that would be our dedicated lane for the buses. The way that we would improve speeds and performance in this section of the corridor includes having that dedicated lane for the buses, giving signal priority at the intersections, and that's not signal preemption like emergency vehicles have. It's priority, so that when the light is already green, the buses have a greater opportunity to get through the intersection by extending that green light if they need it. Now, left turning traffic could use the bus lane in this section, so that's really a safety improvement. You wouldn't have people coming up behind other cars turning left. The other impact that we have in this section is that we would need to remove parking on one side of the street. But here, the buses are going a lot faster because they've got their own lane and they're separated from the local buses altogether. And here's an illustration of how the stations would work in this part of the corridor. And we've got an animation of this over as part of the presentation as well. And basically, the buses go through the intersection and then stop at a station so they're able to load and unload on the right-hand side. The next section of the corridor is the downtown section. Now, this is a more congested area, and we're not going to take away the 2 travel lanes that you have in each direction, but rather what we're going to do is take the bus lanes that we already have today these are the curb lanes, and we're going to improve them. Right now, those bus lanes are only 9 feet wide, and that really is inadequate for full-size buses. So in this section, we're going to make that dedicated lane dedicated to the use of all buses, so not just BRT buses, but all the buses could use it in that section. So there's a few things we're going to do to help increase speeds. One is keeping that dedicated to buses 24/7. Another is adding additional platforms for the local buses. Today, every bus stops at every corner and waits its turn. Here, we would have stations, we would consolidate the stations so they're every 3 blocks, and then we would have 3 platforms at each stop, so the buses could have a much more streamlined trip through this area. And that's an illustration of what that might look like. Now, we haven't really designed this yet. As you'll hear in a moment, the next phase is design. So these renderings are very conceptual in nature and not necessarily what the ultimate project will look like. The last section of the corridor is the east end. And in this area, we've only got really 2 lanes to work with as we go down 14th Street, turn left and go down Main Street. And therefore, we are not going to have a dedicated lane in this portion of the corridor. The bus will move with traffic. So again, as in the West End, the way that the bus will have a travel time savings is by just having a small number of stops in this section. And in this case, it'll be stops at Main Street Station, 25th Street, and then out at Rockets Landing. So those are the characteristics of our recommended alternative. And now let's talk about the impacts. As I mentioned in the earlier slide, we've spent a lot of time looking at the potential environmental impacts of this alternative. This alternative does not use any new right-of-way that isn't already being used for transportation. So that really does help minimize the impacts. But we looked at all of these topics, including neighborhood impacts, environmental justice, historic properties, noise, and so on, and we found that our build alternative does not have any significant impacts. It has some benefits in some areas, and the only one that is really subject of a lot of close study and ongoing coordination is historic resources. It's a very historic corridor. We want to make sure that we take that into account in the ultimate design of our stations, for example. But given that we don't have any impacts and we remain within the right-of-way of an existing transportation corridor, the Federal Transit Administration was able to issue a categorical exclusion, which means we don't need to issue a more elaborate environmental impact document that because this project is basically within the existing space that's used for transportation, we're exempt from that. But as I mentioned, the coordination will continue as we go through design to make sure that nothing new becomes part of the project that could have environmental impacts. Next, I want to talk about some of the benefits of BRT. BRT will have a lot of benefits for the riders and also for businesses, the city, and the county. BRT buses are faster than regular buses, so they will increase their travel speeds by up to 65%. And the reason it's faster is all those reasons that I talked about in describing the build alternative: fewer stops, dedicated lanes, traffic signal improvements, and so on. So you can see that really brings a tremendous improvement to the travel speeds. In fact, the BRT buses will take 14 fewer minutes to get from downtown to Willow Lawn. Now, not everyone rides the entire length of the corridor. So a typical rider on Route 6 today will save about 36 hours a year by taking BRT instead of the local bus. So almost an hour a week total travel time savings for those riders. The service will also attract new riders, and because those folks can now leave their cars at home, they would expect to save over $800 a year in vehicle operating expenses by using BRT. We also have improvements at station areas. We have benefits in terms of calming traffic through the use of dedicated bus lanes. So that all reduces traffic conflicts, and that can reduce the the crash rates in the corridor from anywhere from 8 to 31%. So that's a benefit for everyone, not only the buses, but the cars and the pedestrians in the corridor. The investment itself will create about 406 jobs in the region during design and construction. And the permanence of this type of investment, having the dedicated lanes in the stations, will increase property values in the corridor. We've looked at other cities that have made this type of investment, and a modest estimate of the impacts would be about a 12% increase in property values along the corridor, not counting new development that might occur. So what does it cost to make this investment? Whoops. The things that drive costs include, in terms of the capital costs, the drivers of cost are the number of buses that we need in that peak period, what's the total number of buses we have to put out, and then of course the physical improvements to the corridor. In terms of the operating costs, some of the cost considerations again include the number of peak and off-peak drivers operating the service, the fuel costs, and then also looking at whether if a lot of the existing Route 6 riders move over to BRT, is there an ability to make the overall transit system more efficient as a result of that. So we have an updated cost and project schedule presented in this slide, and this kind of lays out the costs that are coming up in the near term in order to design and construct the project. So the very next phase of the project is preliminary engineering. So that's moving us into the design phase, really deciding what this is going to look like. That's a $4 million study that is already fully funded and will be starting soon. After we have our design, then we move into, after we have our preliminary design, we move into final design and construction, and that will cost just under $50 million. And I'll talk in a moment about where those funds might come from. And then the planned opening would be right around early 2018. Now the operating costs are, if you were just operating the BRT service, it would cost over $2 million a year, but we have looked at what the total system costs are without BRT and the total system costs with BRT, and the difference is only about $400,000. And there are a lot of different reasons for that. One is bringing more CNG buses into the fleet, for example, which really brings those fuel costs down. Another reason is that a lot of the buses in the system will also see travel time savings, and that helps reduce their operating costs. So there are a lot of ways that implementing BRT makes the total system more efficient, and so the net operating cost for BRT is $400,000 a year. And if this service is like the rest of the GRTC system, we would expect fares to cover about 20% of that, leaving $320,000 a year to be covered through other funding sources. So let's talk about who's going to pay for this. In terms of capital funding, we are looking for that the $50 million part of the funding for design and construction, for half of that to come from federal dollars. And there are two ways that could happen. We have recently submitted, GRTC has recently submitted with DRPTs and many other groups support, many of you here gave support to a Tiger Grant application. That's a special funding source that's put out. It has been once a year in recent years, but it's never promised again in the future when it comes out. And so we feel we have a very good case, perhaps, to get that grant for this project. If for some reason we were not selected for the Tiger Grant, there's another federal program that we can pursue called Small Starts that would also cover half of the capital cost. So the remaining capital costs, 34% would come from DRPT, so more than half of the remaining costs would come from DRPT, and that just leaves a total of about 15% of the total costs to come from the city of Richmond and 1% from Henrico County. So that really means that for the local governments investing this, they leverage a lot of state and federal dollars for that investment. The Tiger Grant application, as I just mentioned, received 24 letters of support, and we're very optimistic that we may be able to get that funding for half of the project. But if that doesn't get selected for some reason, the Federal Transit Administration has a program called Small Starts that is another option. We have been following their selection criteria. We're very much in keeping with the way that they like to see transit projects be developed and presented, and we have every expectation that we would be able to get this funding if the Tiger Grant didn't come through. And then finally, the operating funding plan. This would be an annual expense to cover the net increase in staffing and fuel costs and so on. And we would see 24% of that coming from DRPT this is an estimate, and then that would leave 54% to come from the city of Richmond and 2% from Henrico County. But as you can see, those aren't really big dollar amounts. that we'd be asking for them to increase. These are not large increases over what they currently provide to GRTC for annual operating expenses. And as I noted, DRPT would, on the capital side, fund 34%, and then on the operating side, 24%. These are estimates based on DRPT's current funding programs. And then within the local costs, as we were just talking about with the pie charts there, you know, the amount that we need for capital is much lower because we have the opportunity to bring those federal dollars in. But then once it's up and running, we need to keep funding it every year through these operating subsidies. So what's next for BRT? We're at a point now where we have a full-fledged recommended alternative. Our policy and technical advisory committees met at the beginning of the month and are kind of putting their endorsement on our recommended alternative that we're presenting to you tonight. We're having this meeting and tomorrow night's meeting to generate public input. We'll gather all those comments through June 6th and then go to the GRTC board for approval June 17th. And then Amy mentioned we've been cooperating with our regional planning agency, the MPO. They have to have this project in their long-range plan for it to be able to move forward. And so we go to them in either July or August. We'll continue to coordinate with the city and the county to solidify the funding commitments. And as we get into the design process, a lot of coordination will occur to make sure that that design is acceptable and approved by the city. We'll continue to coordinate with VCU, Anthem, and other key stakeholders throughout the corridor, as well as the public. Some of the important things that we'll be looking at in the future include the review of the proposed design and the branding that will ultimately be put on this system. So those are upcoming opportunities for involvement and outreach. As I noted earlier, we expect the project to proceed through design over the next 2.5 years, and then hopefully have an opening day in 2018. So that's our schedule that we have, that we anticipate as of today. And with that, we are ready for any questions you might have. Amy's going to take over for that.
Great. Thank you, Lorna. She does an amazing job of covering a lot of material. So thank you, Lorna. So questions? Now's the time. Yeah, okay, all right. Yes, sir. And then we'll come over here. Oh, thank you, Lorna. Thank you,
I'm assuming that probably when we widen the bus lanes, that we'll probably be taking some of the sidewalk in those areas to provide for the widening. That's the first question. The second question is the bus maintenance facility. Is the current facility adequate to handle the increased number of buses? And if so, or if not, is that included in the capital funding plan? And finally, let's go to the money. The City of Richmond O&M contribution, is that currently planned to be within the current revenue that the city has taken in, or do we expect some type of a tax increase because of that?
Okay. I can answer some of those questions, but I'll also ask the other folks here. Regarding the bus lanes, no, we're not expecting to go outside of the existing right-of-way. So the sidewalks, we're not anticipating having any impacts in that regard. In terms of the bus maintenance facility, the buses, they will be branded buses, but they'll be the similar kinds of buses that we have, that GRTC has today. So there won't be any additional type of maintenance requirement for these buses. In terms of the additional O&M, this is something that the city will have to, and the county will have to incorporate into their ongoing operating assistance, as well as the Department of Rail and Public Transportation that goes to support GRTC. And I'll look to David, and if that's accurate. I mean, I don't think there needs to be any more discussion than that, but if that's not accurate, go ahead and say so. No, the funding and O&M. Yeah, I think that will be part of their ongoing operating budget that they will request from the city. So they know that they're going to be this incremental cost will be basically required as part of the implementation of the BRT service.
Yeah, I think that the funding question would be more suited to somebody from the city of Richmond to answer. I'm not sure exactly how they acquire revenue to transfer to GRTC for O&M. In terms of the maintenance facility, it is plenty big enough in order to support BRT vehicles. We have an adequate number of bays in order to perform maintenance on it. When the facility was designed, the bays were built deep enough to actually accommodate articulated vehicles in the event that someday we needed such types of vehicles to run on the streets. The facility is compressed natural gas compliant. We just opened a $5 million CNG fueling station on site in order to support fueling of the vehicles. It was mentioned during the presentation that the BRT vehicles will be fueled by compressed natural gas, so that's not an issue at all either. The lift equipment inside the maintenance bays, again, are sufficient enough to support the BRT vehicle. There are no capital improvements that are needed to the facility.
Great, thank you, David. Yes, and I think we had a question over here. Did you have a question? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about. I'd love to hear more about how the BRT will help improve the overall system. I saw some bits on numbers and savings, but I'm curious as to whether this is a spine that helps make the rest of the service better, or if this is a route on its own. And then my second question was about the projected ridership for the line and how that compares to other buses. Just doing like a rough calculation with my phone calculator, so this is my like caveat to everyone, this could be totally wrong. It seems like you're saying fare box is 80,000. If we say $3 for a round trip, divide that by 365, that's only 750 round trips a day. And I mean, I know that clearly there would be way more Monday through Friday than on weekends, but that seems very low to me.
Sure, it is. So in terms of the service and the efficiencies, the BRT will help essentially get through the corridor, you know, because we'll have travel time savings, and with this improvement, the other buses are also going to improve from the quality of both the dedicated lane, the curb lane, and also the stops. Okay, so the way they're going to be staging and the way they'll be able to move throughout the corridor is going to improve the efficiency. There will also be efficiencies because the BRT will enhance. There will be routes. There will be savings and efficiencies throughout the service because we're making this investment in BRT. So it's hard to say exactly. You know, it's this one particular thing that's going to help, but overall the system will improve. And as we go forward with the study, we're going to continue to look at how the system is going to feed into the spine and how that will impact the entire service.
Does that include the new transfer station development and the fact that buses are off that corridor for the next 2 years?
It does not. We did not have any assumptions built in to our modeling about a transfer facility because there wasn't one designated, and right now the site is temporary. So if and when there's a permanent site, then GRTC, as they move forward, will certainly want to look at that and how that integrates and feeds into the BRT service. Those are good questions. The ridership, we're expecting 11,000 riders that will benefit, and approximately 3,300 actual daily riders on the BRT itself.
Why is the fare box so low? Is that not calculating subsidized riders? It's just typically a ride instead of $3 round trip.
So that would be, it's typical for the system. So the 20% is not just for the BRT. The 20% operating assistance is for the system. Is that right? You want to answer that?
I was just going to say, GRTC, we're developing more of like a cash flow model that'll do the math the way that you're describing it. But for this level of planning, we're just looking at kind of the rule of thumb of what kind of revenue capture that GRTC has as the whole system, and so as kind of a conservative assumption to make sure that we're not underestimating the fare box return.
Yes. Thank you, Lauren. Does that help answer? We had one back here, and then here, and then here. Yes, sir.
My name is Montague Magruder. I served on the GRTC and Transit Study Task Force, which is a commission that was created by City Council in 2012 and concluded in 2013. So some of the questions I will be asking are in relation to some of the recommendations made. First question I have is, according to the presentation, the museum VCU section will be running in the middle of the street when the recommendation number 9 from the GRTC and Transit Study Task Force would recommend that the bus lanes be extended all the way down Broad Street on the curb side, all the way to the county line, and extend the hours of operation there in effect. Would this be a better alternative instead of constructing lanes in the middle of the street, which would require buses to basically turkey neck to get to from one side of the street to the other, and would be more safer for those who would have to cross the street from the middle because of mobility impairments? Second question is, how many studies were actually done to show that there was any kind of interest in having service to Rockets Landing? To my knowledge, there has never been any studies that have shown that anyone in the Rockets Landing area is actually interested in any kind of transit there in the first place. Another question I have is, what would happen if the Richmond Metropolitan Transportation Authority, which was just created by the State Assembly this year, were to actually go forward and actually take control of all public transit within the Richmond Metro? And why is there a disproportionate amount of funding from between the city and Henrico County? Those are the questions I have basically at this point.
Okay, thank you. Those are good questions. In terms of the museum district and where we've identified the dedicated guideway in the median, one of the reasons, and I'll look to Lorna if she has better operational input on this, but essentially that particular area, we want to be able to get through that corridor, fairly quickly, and having the dedicated guideway in the median was the most appropriate place to have it for operation perspective. Now, where we transition from Adams over to 4th Street, there will be a transition. We were not going to take any parking in that particular area. Okay, so there will be some queue jumping as we get into the design and engineering of the service. There will be some crossover to get to the dedicated lane. Okay.
How exactly would that work if, unless all the traffic is stopped from being able to cross, for the buses to cross over, buses are still going to have to fight traffic to get from one lane, from one side of the street to the other?
And that's something, there's some signal operations that we can do using queue jumps, which would actually allow the buses a green light to get over and ahead of the cars. It is a technique. It's a traffic operations technique that other cities in the country have used that just allows the bus to advance. And in terms of your question about the mobility and people being able to access the median station, that you are correct. We are going to have very safe crossings, and the signals are going to have to be timed to allow for that. So everything is going to have to be ADA compatible. And again, those are some design elements that will be looked at in this next phase of study that GRTC will be undertaking.
To follow up on that, has there been any kind of sign that the traffic engineering department of the city would be willing to rework the synchronization to make sure that the queue jumps and whatnot will actually work?
That's going to have to be part of, yes, that's part of the engineering that will be necessary. We have worked with the engineering department throughout this whole process. We've done traffic impact studies. So we've actually placed the bus facilities in places that will have the lowest amount of impact, not only on traffic, but also at the intersections. So that's why we did place the median where we did, and we transitioned over to the curb where we did, because that was from an overall transportation impact perspective was the best place to have it.
Well, what I understand, though, a lot of it was mainly because of a lot of business pushback about people not being able to park their cars in front of the businesses, which I believe is a lot more than parking. It seems that a lot of businesses along that section have their own parking in the first place.
We did respond to that. We heard that parking is at a premium in that particular area, and we agree with that. And that's why we are not recommending removal of any parking in that particular area. So we're taking the opportunity to move the bus from the median to the curb. Now, in terms of your second question regarding rockets, there have been studies that go back to 2000 before 2000 that have looked at the Richmond region, and it has identified the Broad Street corridor as really being the best foot forward and the area that would support a rapid transit type of service. And knowing that that this is the region's best foot forward for federal funding, we wanted to make sure that we had a corridor that had the land uses, that have the residential, we have healthcare, we have education, we have employment, all within this 7.5 mile corridor. We're linking Rockets Landing. It's a mixed-use development. Those are folks that will utilize this service, and so all of the studies over the many years have pointed to this particular corridor, and Rockets and Willow Lawn were the two target points for us to be able to have the service be as their destinations on each end.
But would it make sense to just go ahead and route up to Churchill instead along 25th Street, along Jefferson and on out, and then have it use Interstate 64 to run to the airport, which has been suggested, to connect a lot of people to the jobs and to actually spearhead a lot of the regular recommended route changes that were made in the comprehensive operations analysis done by GRTC a few years back, which basically suggested that a lot of the routes need to be removed from Broad Street. I mean, because you can take some of the local bus lines that would feed into the BRT line, and then there would, which would increase usage. Basically, you could turn the BRT into a main trunk line that hits basically all the marks, especially if you were to have a circle train station.
Yes, sir. And if you'll excuse me, that is what we're doing. And we did a special study that looked at Churchill and the accessibility. And there is a recommendation to have a better East End circulation, which GRTC will advance as you've noted in the comprehensive operations analysis. So we acknowledge that, and in terms of the airport, that would be a future type of recommendation, and that might be something that we would look at next. In terms of the RMA implementation, there have been discussions. They are a regional entity, but GRTC is the project sponsor, and they are the ones that will implement the BRT service in the Richmond area. And in terms of the city and the county, it's really, and GRTC can probably speak to this a little more fluently, but currently how they basically charge the city and the county, there's like a mile, there's a very small piece that goes actually into Henrico County. So they're actually paying for their share of the service. If it gets extended to Short Pump, or if it gets extended out to the airport at some point in the future, then Henrico County would be expected to pay for those additional operating expenses. I think we had some more questions back here. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Sorry.
Okay, I got 3 questions. The area that you're talking about is heavily affected. I live in the historic Churchill area. I also work by the Willow Lawn area. But my questions I wanted to ask you were, I see here the time from the downtown to the Willow Lawn. That's the time that it was after you all did the transit bay. Can you tell me what is the difference between the way that you all doing it now than the way that it was before you all did the transfer station? Because to me, that's the same thing. It's the same time as it was before you all did the transfer station.
So the existing travel time is 30 minutes? Is that correct, Lorna? End to end. The existing travel time today is 30 minutes.
That was beforehand. That's now after you all did the transfer station.
Huh?
The last project you all did.
Yeah.
Okay.
The route six.
Before, when the buses ran straight through Broad Street, it was 15 minutes. So I don't see a difference in what you all doing now than how it was before. And my other question is, I see a cost of 53.8 million in making something, doing a new project, but I rode on a bus Friday and sat on a bus for an hour and a half on a bus with no air conditioning. So what are you all doing to fix what we have?
And we're gonna, those existing service type of questions, Garland Williams, he's actually available to answer those specific questions. Because there have been some things in relation to the temporary transfer center that Garland is familiar with, and he can also assist you with what they're doing in terms of maintaining their existing fleet. Yes, sir, and then we'll come up here.
Thank you. I listened to you, what you guys have looked at. And generally, one of the biggest challenges with making change to urban system like this is what you wind up with changes in the drainage, stormwater drainage. We've changed the grades. You've spoken about having to move the lanes. You're going to have different fixtures there, different guideways, and so you're going to have to change the stormwater drainage. Given the broad is basically the high point of both sides, I want to ask what percentage of the capital budget is estimated for drainage, and have you guys looked at any potential impacts down, say, 4, 5, 6 blocks away from the routes, down the hills on both sides, for maybe overloading capacity?
Yeah, we haven't gotten into that level of design at this point. That will be the next step, the design and engineering. So we're kind of at the higher conceptual level. But in terms of any stormwater, that's something that the next phase will look at. So we can note that. Yes.
Okay, two really easy questions.
Okay, thank you.
Got two really easy questions. Will you have a one-for-one bus replacement, so whatever comes in, one goes out? And related to that is, will these be multiple line buses? I think a term was used earlier, but 2 units connected together or more?
Oh, yeah.
Articulated? Will these be articulated vehicles?
No, sir.
Okay.
They will not at this time. In terms of the bus replacement, I'm not sure. Do you mean, I'm not sure.
So when we bring 14 of these BRTs on, we're going to drop 14
No.
regular units?
No. There will be some route efficiencies that we will see in terms of implementing the BRT service, but we're not necessarily taking one away. So we're not putting one BRT vehicle on and taking one existing vehicle off. Its service may be refined to support the BRT, and that's where we're getting a lot of the system efficiencies.
So does Willawong become a bit of a transfer location because you've got buses there now, and then you put BRT on top of that, so you have a new BRT and you don't replace those, or maybe you have some replacement?
There will be some
That'll
looking
be a
at the service.
transfer station of a sort?
They may look at that as part of their analysis and as this advances, because that's an ongoing sort of refinement. We're at the planning level. They're going to do a much more in-depth study as this moves forward, and we do see this moving forward. They're going to want to really look at how they're maximizing their existing fleet by making this investment, and there will be efficiencies. I'm not sure who was next. I know we had a couple back here, but I don't want to shortchange anybody. Let's go ahead and go back. Where are you? Go ahead, Scudder. You're over here. Scudder, you pick.
You mentioned it like possibly extending into Short Pump. But when I first saw this map, didn't it already extend out to Short Pump? And why is that not Or why is this map not extended out?
It did originally, the original COA recommendation, it did have it going out to Rockets, but we wanted to make sure that we had a good system that would be competitive for federal funding. And the 7.5 mile segment was the best foot forward from existing land use and the ability and implementability. This really was. So there isn't anything saying that the next phase wouldn't go out to Short Pump, or those are items for additional study, for sure.
All right, that's not going to be what's going to be constructed by 2018. Is not out
No.
to Short Pump. No. Okay.
No, sir. It's just from Willow Lawn to Rockets Landing.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. And then we'll come over here.
Hi, I take the number 6 Monday through Friday, and the normal stop that I pick it up on is North Lombardi and Broad Street, and I actually take it all the way up to Staples Mills because I work for Anthem.
Okay.
So my concern is I don't see my bus stop available on this particular route, and I understand the fare is going to be the same, but my concern is the timing, because even with the transit change, my buses are not coming like they normally do. So my concern is it really worth me getting on this or just getting on a regular bus if there's going to be still a number 6 going up to Willow Lawn versus this particular new route that it's in a proposal for. But on top of that, it's just going to be one lane for the buses all the way down to Willow Lawn, just strictly for the buses, or is it going to be in the traffic?
It's 2 lanes.
Okay.
So there'll actually be 2 travel lanes for the BRT, and you will actually have a Staples Mills station that's actually right there at Anthem.
Okay.
And we've been working with Anthem. You'll be happy, I think, probably to know that we've been working with Anthem on potentially having park and ride in that particular location. In terms of the accessibility, you could still take the Route 6 and have your access. The benefit of the BRT is you're going to have 10-minute peak, which you have good service right now, but you'll have 15-minute off-peak service. Okay, so you'll have better off-peak service than what you have today. So you'll have better reliability as well, just from the travel time perspective, because they'll be operating in their dedicated lane and not in mixed traffic.
Yeah, but see, I still have to walk up in order to get on the bus, like on one of the stops that you have. Because like I said, I'm getting on at North Lombardi and Broad. I would have to walk up to Heritage and Meadow, or go down to Schaefer, which is quite a distance, especially if I'm trying to get to work one time.
Right. And those are some local, I think, how we feed into that GRTC might be able to look at, and that hopefully might work to your advantage as they go to look at their feeder system. I hope that answers your question. You okay?
Hi. This is more of a comment than anything about the presentation. I think it would have been real efficacious if you had shown images of existing BRT systems like ones in Medellin or Bogota or even Mexico City, because I think it would have really helped, especially with the gentleman who asked the question earlier about the safety concerns about these systems that travel in the median. And from personal experience, having ridden some of these in Latin America and Europe, is that they are actually very safe, because the infrastructure that's put in place is there to protect people, especially those in wheelchairs. So I think images of systems that are effective, like the ones in Latin America, may have been effective, so maybe for future presentations.
We actually do have some illustrations
You do?
yes. But I mean, that's a good point. We didn't have it on our presentation here, which we do have images, but we wanted to not have a whole lot of. But yeah, we do have some images out here, and we also have a fly-through of what the median running guideway would look like and the stations. But the design, as we get further and GRTC takes this into the design and engineering, there's going to be a lot of time to talk about that.
Awesome.
I was just going to, I guess, echo some comments regarding your question. BRTs are designed at various standards. They're very prevalent in South America, and systems that people might be familiar with in South America are constructed at a much higher level standard than people might see around the United States. You know, we have 5 top BRT systems in the U.S., the highest quality being in Cleveland. So as we talk about the BRT that we're thinking about in Richmond, we always talk about the system in Cleveland. Las Vegas is another one. I believe Portland, Oregon, Pittsburgh, and Los Angeles, California is the 5th. So again, people who may have seen BRTs or even ridden on BRTs in South America, that's not exactly what we're looking at doing here. Those come with a much higher price tag than BRTs in the United States are built at.
Well, but at the same time, we're being able to show ones that are highly effective.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, sir.
So building on the heritage question from the lady on the other side, the Heritage Meadow, just trying to understand the rationale of why it's not at Lombardi, given the fact that you have the natural destination of the Krogers and Lowe's and other things that would seem to deal with quality of life,
Stop at Heritage.
as opposed to Lombardi.
Hermitage.
I'm sorry, Hermitage
Okay, I
Meadow
was
as
like,
opposed to
I
Lombardi.
don't know where this is.
apologize.
Don't we
Right.
have one at Hermitage?
Yeah, we do.
No, no.
They're saying why not Lombardi?
Why not
Oh,
Lombardi?
we're not Lombardi.
Right.
Since that's where the
And-
shopping is in the
Okay.
Right.
midpoint.
Well, I will say that, you know, we looked at the original proposals for station areas and refined them based on not only the existing land use, but the future land use and the potential for redevelopment. So that's one consideration. The traffic considerations and also the overall spacing was another. But at the end of the day, one of the flexibilities that we have as we move into design is to look, you know, within a block or so of each station that we've identified, is there, you know, a slight improvement to where the location might be. So, so overall, the number of stations that we have, the general locations are set for, in terms of the planning study, but the exact station locations could be subject to further refinement.
Yes.
Hi.
Okay, and then we'll come over here.
I'll just lead off with saying, in concept, I'm a big supporter of this. But my question and really my concern in this is when I look at the 2 endpoints, west of 14th Street, you know, this looks great. It ends in a shopping center in Henrico that's going to get a lot of sales tax from where the endpoint is, but they're putting in 1%. When I look at the eastern endpoint, which is my concern, to the gentleman to my right's point, if Rocket Landing is indeed the endpoint, when we compare just the amount of people that live there versus Churchill as a whole, that really doesn't capitalize on having mass impact. So, frankly, just to be frank, this city has 26% poverty, and we need access to jobs.
Right.
So if it's going to stay in Rocket's Landing, is that because A, there's a perceived boom in construction that we don't know about yet? Or are there going to be bus routes getting people from Church Hill going south to Rocket's Landing so they can catch the bus?
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Lorna can speak a little more detail in terms of the analysis, but about a year ago, we worked with NAACP on this issue, and because there was concern about that, so we did a thorough analysis to understand, was there a better way to serve that particular East End? And the answer was there wasn't a better travel time savings from what they have today for us to make that circulation up. And so it would potentially be a lot more costly for us to do that versus having better local bus service for them to be able to feed in.
So what's the reality? I'm sorry, I'm going to
That's
challenge
okay.
you for a minute, but if I've got a $1.5 million condo in Rockets Landing, am I really leaving my car there to go to work, or is it more impactful to be north of town?
That's what the developers.
What?
Well,
I
we
didn't-
met,
I
we
didn't
met
quite
with
get what
the,
he said.
we met with the developers at Rockets Landing, and they specifically noted that the kind of tenant that they're getting in there is they're looking to be 0 and 1 car households, and there is a real desire for access via transit from that area. And of course, we're also looking at the anticipated future development level. Certainly the regional transit studies that preceded this one were looking at future anticipated levels of development, which is anticipated to be much greater in that area. But probably more importantly, back to Amy's point, we looked closely at the question of serving Church Hill, and basically you really wouldn't see travel time savings by extending the buses up Broad Street, because that is already operating pretty efficiently. And the service you have today, of course, provides a lot of access in that community. If BRT, as you've noted, has fewer stops. So through the coordination that we had in looking at those questions about looking at travel time, looking at access, the kind of compromise that was agreed upon was that to have a spur from Church Hill to Rockets Landing, so that people who want to get on BRT for a longer trip, they would have that ability to do that through the spur service. But most of the people using the bus today from Church Hill are really primarily going downtown, and if we had the BRT going there, they'd be saving, just a few seconds off of their trip. But maybe having to walk further.
While the distance would be further, will the travel time be shorter?
Yes. Yes, we verified that.
Yeah, and we did a thorough analysis because we shared your concern. I mean, there's a population out there that we're targeting, that we want to serve, and we want to make sure that we're doing it appropriately and effectively. So when that came up from our second round of public meetings, I believe, we did a thorough analysis.
And
So
Scudder did the analysis, I think.
Scudder did the analysis. Oh, Scudder.
I was part of the study team working on that, and we looked at the savings, and there are a lot of local routes, and we looked specifically at the surveys of where people were getting on, where they were getting off from those routes that serve Church Hill, and most of them were getting off downtown. And the way you would route this BRT service, the travel time savings would be minimal. The other thing to add to all of that is by going that way down Broad Street and up Church Hill and terminating somewhere on Church Hill, be it up 25th or Chimborazo or wherever, you miss Main Street corridor. And while there are a lot of people in Church Hill, the density is much higher in Shockoe Bottom in the Main Street corridor. So you have a much higher potential long-term of developing very high ridership levels, and long-term at Rockets Landing as well. So the combination of those two things led us to keep the termination down at Rockets Landing. So I think.
Okay. We have here, and then we'll come to you, Virginia. Yes, sir.
Hi. So I have a few questions. Did you guys mention the commute, like the time that it would take to get to Willow Lawn from Rockets Landing as it is now, and then how much shorter the commute would be with BRT?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's 30 minutes today.
Okay, and then
30 minutes today, and it's 14 minutes with the. Yeah.
35 minutes today, 21 minutes with BRT from downtown to Willow Lawn.
with the BRT.
With the BRT, it would be 21 minutes. Today it's 35 minutes.
So we're saving 14 and a half minutes.
Okay. Second, have you guys? This is the first meeting I've been to right now, but do you guys plan on going out into Church Hill to conduct any community engagement meetings with that neighborhood specifically? And if so, would you plan on doing that?
We've been out working with the public, and as I mentioned, we worked with the Church Hill and the East End neighborhoods very extensively about a year ago. And obviously, as this thing advances, there'll be additional opportunity for public outreach and community engagement. But we've done a fairly extensive level of outreach with the neighborhoods thus far.
And then the last question, I guess the bus transfer stations. I think you touched on it, but how does this incorporate that in the larger scheme?
Yeah.
If you could kind of elaborate.
It doesn't, because we didn't have a solid spot of where the transfer center was going to go when we began this study back in 2009. And quite frankly, they have independent utility. It isn't that when GRTC finds their permanent location that they'll want to integrate the service into the spine, into the BRT. But we didn't make any assumptions about the transfer center in the study that we're doing today.
Well, I guess it depends on. I mean, if it's located a few blocks, will the BRT try to accommodate the transfer station, or?
Of course. I mean, it would be central when GRTC finally has a location. They're going to do the analysis to make sure that their route circulation and their service is feeding in appropriately to the BRT. But that hasn't happened yet. So.
And I guess when that happens, you'll see community engagement stuff.
They will absolutely. They have sought a lot of community engagement through that process, and they'll continue. And we have Virginia, and then, okay. And then we'll come up here, Virginia, sorry.
I'm just curious, what is Rockets Landing? I mean, why was it chosen?
It's right out East Main Street. It is a very dense, mixed-use type of development. There's a lot of residential, there's retail in that particular development, and it's expected to continue to develop in that fashion. So that type of a development is really attractive for a transit type of service, because those are riders that are really wanting to utilize a public transportation service versus having a car.
Well, see, the reason why I'm interested in that is because I am one of the disabled people in Richmond, and I take the bus everywhere I go, and obviously people who are disabled and everything and living on SSI or SSDI can't afford places like Rockets Landing.
Right.
And that's the thing, you know, it's frustrating for people like us when you put it in a place where rich people can go,
right,
but poor people don't have access to it. You know, it's to me that's a little bit unfair.
Well, I will tell you that when we improve the service, it does benefit everyone, and I understand what you're saying, and it can feel that way, but certainly hopefully the efficiencies long term will benefit you, and we're hoping that you will see a benefit.
Well, look, I've got one other question.
Okay.
Eventually, after 2018, once this is all implemented and put in place and everything, are you all going to add transit systems, transit lines onto this, or is this going to be the main one, the Broad Street corridor?
I didn't quite get that one.
You know what I'm saying? I would just wonder whether you'd be going, like having corridors that go in the north side or further in the east side, west side, all of that kind of stuff.
Future expansion.
Yeah, that would be a future expansion. That's not something that we're doing today. It's just, the project is just from Willow Lawn to Rockets Landing today, but there could be a future expansion.
The reason why I was wondering is because for people like me, I go up and down Broad Street all the time.
Yeah.
There's nothing new as far as I'm concerned, because the places that I would benefit from, Broad Street 6 accommodates them.
Yes,
So I don't really see a lot of use for me with BRT. But I just wanted to
Well,
bring that
thank
up.
you. I mean, those are good comments. Those are very valid comments, and we certainly understand what you're saying. Okay.
Has any thought been given to extending operating hours on the weekends to say, I don't know, 2 or 2:30, even if a bit less frequent, in order to, especially running through VCU and Chucko Bottom, in order to help get some, drinking drivers off the road?
Well, the hours of operation actually for BRT, we have to operate how many hours a day? The length of the GRTC system. I thought that was a longer day. So that might be something that GRTC can consider as they advance, and those would be board decisions and policies, but there are operating costs associated with increasing the level of service. So they would have to really look at that. But thank you. I mean, that's a good point, and
Well, the buses number 1, 2, and 4 operate on Church Hill now. The local buses 1, 2, and 4.
Okay.
On Church Hill? Okay. But what about Fulton area, the Fulton Bottom? Is that going to have a circulator or something that will feed into the bus
BRT.
rapid transit?
Where's the Fulton Bottom? That's right? Yes, that is part of our analysis, yes, that whole Fulton area, yes, ma'am. Yes, that will have a circulator. And then we can take a couple more questions and then we can, Okay, what? I mean, I will take questions as long as people have them.
So suggest I get on a feeder line. I get onto bus rapid transit then, the next bus. I go a long ways and then I get onto a third bus feeding somewhere else in the metropolitan area. How many times am I going to pay for my transit? Is it going to be a unified system or will I be paying in different ways at different times?
Those are some fare collection policy questions, but right now we're expecting the fare to be the same. So you would have the same base fare, and then if there are any transfer fares, that's something that the GRTC will look at as they advance the service. But for right now, we're expecting the fares and the transfers to be exactly as they are today.
Will a lot of these continued development parts of the process be available in a very public way as you continue this process?
We expect it, yes. Our state and federal funding will be paying for the next steps of this, and we will absolutely be having public involvement through that.
Hi there. I think what you're doing here is terrific, and I think what we've talked about before with the poverty in the city and those access to jobs, that this could be a real key. But we've seen in this phase from 2009 to ribbon cutting in 2018, it'd be close to a decade. When this happens and it catches on like wildfire, what can we do to reduce those times so it's not another decade to where we can move these lines out to Short Pump, Midlothian, Mechanicsville, and the other major job centers in the region? I think I've had some of Ben Campbell's Kool-Aid with RBA Rapid Transit. But what are targeted ways that we can advocate for now? Is it getting on the long-range transportation plan projects there, or other studies that can lead to that turnover time being much less the second time around?
It's working with Ben and the outreach and really educating and letting your local elected officials know that there's a desire for this and a demand for expanding the BRT and any public transportation service. So there's an element of education, and I think we as a region, as the Richmond region, and working with the MPO and the Metropolitan Planning Organization and the Planning District Commission, working with those staff in terms of understanding how transit works in this region, I think will be critical. And those are conversations that are going to happen naturally, and they're already happening. So we just need to continue with that. But thank you because it's voices like you that help to make it work.
One last question. Is there any future plans to relocate any of the bus routes to Grace Street?
To Grace?
Yes.
That's a Garland question. That would be a transfer center type of question, so that's not something that I can answer. But Garland can tell you, and after the time, I think we've probably exhausted everybody at this point. I will go all night because this is what we do, but and I really enjoy the public engagement. But probably everybody else is going, when are you going to stop, Amy? So one more question, and then we'll be finished.
Question as well, but it sounds like everyone has a lot of enthusiasm and also great ideas for how the routes and the rest of the system need to be feeding into the BRT. And so my question is, when's our opportunity to participate in that component of it? Because at the next meetings, then again on the BRT, and we're going to raise similar questions about, hey, like I get on the bus every day at 25th and Marshall, right? And I can walk down the 25th Street Hill, but I will tell you that in July I'm not going to walk back up it without looking like a wet dog.
Right. Right.
So how do we get to participate in those conversations, and when are they going to take place? Because those are things that I think are incredibly important to making sure that this improves the entire system, and that everyone across the city has access to these improvements.
Right. David, you're the GRTC leader of how this is moving forward. So
I think that plays into a lot of the questions that I've been hearing tonight that I haven't really had a chance to respond to. But our priority over the next year or two is going to be figuring all this out. You know, we've heard the term feeder routes, we've heard the term circulators. We don't know all those answers yet. Those are the things that we need to figure out as we move through this preliminary engineering and design phase. And one of our priorities is figuring out how the current bus system integrates with the BRT trunk and the corridor. So over the next year and two, we're going to be going through these questions, and we'll be getting out with the communities. Yes, somebody asked about, are we going to meet with the Churchill neighborhoods? Yes, that's part of what GRTC is going to be doing over the next year. We do want to get out into the communities. We do want to get your input before we put anything in place. But at the same time, we need to take a look at the overall system in connection with the amount of money that we have to operate it. We could come up with the best ideas in the world in terms of how to get people to BRT, but if we don't have the funding in order to put things like that in place, then they're nothing other than great ideas. So we've got to work with the communities, we've got to work with the localities and the elected officials and figure out all the funding components. Those are all unanswered questions, but they're things that we're going to be discussing over the next year or two.
Absolutely, yes. Yep.
Absolutely, and I think just based on your comment, I think we need to probably put something in place on our end to solicit feedback and then to push information and turn out to you all who are interested in receiving it. So, absolutely.
Down, then we can contact you after this. So please, if you didn't put that down when you signed in, do that.
Yeah. Yes, that's important. Okay, well, I think that serves as our last bit of comment. So thank you all. We'll be at the boards if anybody has any remaining questions. Thank you all so much. We appreciate you coming out.